This is part 2 of the shoe tutorial, and in this video we will cover creating textures and creating normal maps. We've got our shoe modeled, we have our UVs done. Now we need to export a UV layout so we can create the textures in Photoshop. This will also work in GIMP, but I'm going to show Photoshop. So let's grab our shoe here, go to edit mode, hit A to select all, go to our UV window here and click UV, export UV layout. Let's just click this, but you type what you want to call it here. The 2K is probably too high, but we'll leave it at that. You can always reduce it later. And then export UV layout. The UV map is hard to figure out what's going on in Photoshop, so here's a little trick to make it easier for yourself. So go to your shader window here, to your albedo that's plugged in, and click on the file, and I saved it here. Okay, let's go to our texture painting window here, and let's go to our shoe. Okay, and it's hard to see, so let's change the lighting to something brighter. Maybe this one, and turn up the strength. Okay. Okay, so it's definitely on there. Let's isolate so we have just our new shoe. And let's do some texture painting. So let's also make sure we're on the right map, which we are. And then hit the N key and tool and make sure we're on the same material and we have the correct texture we're going to paint on, which is the UV we just saved. Okay, and let's scooch this. Let's actually make it visible here too. So when you look at the map in your other program, this is rather confusing. It's like, what is this piece here? What is this little thing there? Which orientation is up? It's confusing. So I do this really quickly just to make it easier for myself to understand what's what. So let's grab the paint tool, and then let's grab a color here like blue or something. Make this smaller, and we'll just, point up so we know what's up. We can do things like if we want stitching there, we can just indicate, okay, the stitching is going to go roughly there. So just go through your shoe and put little notes for yourself on so you can understand what's where. Change the color here. That's up. Then if we want stitching here, we can do that. So indicate where that stitching would be. So kind of the same thing to the whole shoe. And you don't need to worry about the quality of it too much. This is just to help you out. And also, let's just save it so we don't lose anything. So image, save as. So don't save it over your current one. Save it over like UV guide, because we're going to use the actual UV map. So let's just save that here. Okay, let's go back to adding our little notes. Did I have that on the UV? I think that was here. Okay, so let's just go. So I had two materials here. This way you could kind of see that that part's a chrome buckle. But let's just delete that. This should now take our current UV, put a little arrow here. It should show up on our texture. Okay, that's correct. So that's up. And what is this? Oh, that's that. Okay. So you can see how this map gets confusing sometimes. So this helps me out tremendously. Have some stitching on this guy here. So let's go and indicate that for ourselves. It's a little bit tedious, but boy, if you're doing texture work in Photoshop, this helps a lot. Okay, so let's see here. Oh, let's do the sole. I mean the inside sole. I'm not sure what that's called. Inside. And remember this trim here was a separate piece. So let's just color that. Okay, so I think that's enough detail for us here. Image, save as, and save. This is the look that we're going for. So you can see we've got a smooth toe and smooth heel that connects to a smooth strap. We've got stitching going around the heel and the strap and the toe area. We've got a diamond pattern on these two areas here with a little extra stitching. Then we've got a couple of chrome pieces. We've got the heel and the latch that's chrome. And then we've got, it's hard to see, but there's a leather texture on this flat inside area and a darker leather texture down here. So let's go and add all those in. We're also going to create fillets on some of these areas here. When we bake normal maps, it'll soften up all these crisp edges. Okay, let's go jump into Photoshop. Let's open up our UV map here. So we'll open up our UV map, and then we'll also open up our guide for ourselves here. So we've got both of those. We will drag this here to the side, hit V or click this here. Click, hold Shift and drag it over, and that should drop it right in the exact alignment as the original. You can check it by toggling that. You can see it's lined up. Let's call this guide, and we'll call this UV map. Briefly, how you navigate in Photoshop: you hold down the space button and a hand appears, and if you left click and drag, you move around. If you space plus control and left click, you zoom in. Space control alt and left click, you zoom out. So that's how you navigate. So let's go and bring in a texture for that diamond pattern. So let's go to File and Open. So let's just use like this one here. So this is a free texture that I got online. The link for it is below. So you can go and get your own free textures there. But let's just grab this. Make sure it's an RGB because we're going to use it to make a normal map. So go to Image and Mode and RGB. Here we go, Mode, RGB. Okay, looks the same. And Control A, Control C, Control W to close it, Control V to paste it. Okay, so now we have to do a little bit of guesswork here. So first we need to mirror this, duplicate it a few times. Let's explain the layers here. So yeah, so you can see there's different layers here on the layer panel, and so each one lies on top of another one, and you can make them opaque the way they normally are if you have it set to normal, or you can make it to multiply, and it kind of adds the color to it, so you can play with different layering styles. So let's leave it on normal for now. And what we want to do is we want to take our texture here. Oh yeah, so if you have to have the layer selected that you want to affect. So I'm going to click this layer 1. Let's call this diamond, which is what I want to manipulate. So I hit V and you can move this around. So what we want to do is we want to put this texture over the areas that we wanted to have that texture, and it was the area in front of, behind the heel, behind the toe, and this little side area. And we can check it. Okay, so we want it in this green area here and this blue area. Okay, so let's go back to our Photoshop file. So we want it in this green area here, and the blue area was the strap area, so these areas here. So we want to put this texture over those. But this looks like it's going to be way too big. So and if we scale it down, it's probably not going to fit. Oops, let's tell you how I scaled that. So if you hit Control T while this layer is selected, you get these little control nodes on the corners, and you can click it and scale it down, or if you hold shift, it proportionally scales things down. So that's how you can scale things in Photoshop. But first, I think it's good to mirror it. So you can repeat this pattern by hitting the V tool, hold Alt, left click, and then drag, and you'll see it moves the second one here. Then hold shift, and then if you kind of mess around with where you have it when you hit shift, it'll constrain it along one axis, and it'll snap in place. Then hit Control E to merge that layer down. Let me show you that again. So I'm on this layer here. If you hit Control E, it merges it down to the layer just below it. So now this is all one big chunk. Okay. Again, hit V to make sure you're on the V tool or the move tool. Hit Alt. You get that double arrow. Left click and drag. Then hold shift and drag it down until it snaps. Then hit Control E to merge it down. And let's do it one more time just to be sure we have enough material. This is pretty slow. Okay, so now we've got this big old map we can use to scale it down as small as we want to. And let's duplicate this in case we mess it up. We've got our layer selected. We've got our guide above it so we can still see where we're going to put this. And hit Control T to transform it. Click a corner, hold shift, and just drag the whole thing down to as big as you think the diamond pattern should be. So just clicking and dragging here, looking here, and I think this is that front area. I think it's still too big, so let's zoom out a bit so we can see our handles. It's just a very free-form kind of way of doing this. I think that looks okay. Okay, we can fit over here and there, so that's good. So hit Enter to freeze it or apply it, and so now it's locked and done. And so that's good, but we also want to cover this area here. So hit V, we're on that layer here that we just made. Scaled down. Hit Alt, then left click and drag, and it moves it down here like that. Okay, so we have this part covered, but it's also covering this blue area that we just made, so we don't want this seam to be visible. So let's click this layer here to see which one we're actually affecting. Now let's erase this area here. So the easiest way to do this would be to hit L. So normally L is the, it's that lasso tool. So you can select like that. I don't like that, so I'm going to hit Control D to unselect it. And I'm going to hold Shift and hit L. And this, you just click, 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 and you can draw a polygon style loop. I like that tool better. Hit Delete, so it's deleted. So now this way, we're not blocking our lower texture map. Okay. And then let's delete everything else because we don't need any of that. So let's just hit L and circle around our little area here like that. And hit Control Shift I to invert the selection and hit Delete to delete it. So now this is covering just that little island. And I suppose we can do that for up here too. So we'll just hit L again and just click through like that. I can see I didn't go far enough, but that's okay. Then we will Control Shift I and hit delete. Whoops, so I deleted the wrong layer. So make sure we're on the correct layer and hit delete to delete it. Okay, that's good. Then hit Control D to unselect, L to lasso again, and just click through because we don't want our toe to have this texture. Okay, and delete. And then Control D to unselect. And then we also want to cover this little thing here I cut off or something. So hit S to go to the stamp or the clone tool. Hit Alt and you see this little circle crosshair, which is the sample for the clone stamp. Since we want to expand it right where these two lines cross, we should click it where it crosses. So click it right there with the Alt left click, then go down here. You can kind of line it up, and then let's just add a bit more there. Okay. Okay, so let's see here. Now let's merge this layer down. Control E. So this is all of our diamond pattern area. So let's just check it out and see how it looks really quick. So Control Shift S. I'm going to save it as JPEG for now because it saves it fast, but we won't save the final file like that. So let's save it in textures and UV map test and save. So then let's check it out in Blender. Okay, so let's go and load up the texture we just created. Open. Okay, so we've got our diamond pattern on this front area here, which is good. We've got it here, which is good. And oh, we actually didn't want it here. So let's go and delete that. Okay, so let's go back to Photoshop, delete this area here, and let's also add in a leather texture for this area here and this area down there. Back in Photoshop here, let's make sure we are on our diamond texture. Click that layer here, hit L, and let's click around the area that we want to delete. Enter, delete, Control D. Okay, so that is good. Now let's add the leather texture to the sole area down here and all of these purpley areas here and there. And then this inside area too. And these are not purple, so I think this is the outside trim. So let's figure out what to do with that later. Okay, let's open a leather texture. So File and Open. Let's go to our archive. This one I got from Polyhaven. There, it's free, CC&O. Definitely support them on Patreon. I'll put the link below. And let's grab that. Control W, Control V. Okay, so let's do the same thing here. Let's hit the V tool, drag it, and let's just hold Alt and Shift and duplicate it a couple times. Okay, so let's drag that down here. Let's just make sure this leather texture looks like it's the right size for the sole, and maybe a touch smaller. I think that's okay. Hit Enter, and hit the L key, and let's select here. Actually, let's call this leather. And let's duplicate that in case we mess up. Hide that. Make sure we're on our copy here. Hit L on the keyboard. So I hit L to get this. So hit L to start the tool. Click to actually put your first point. Then you can hold Shift and constrain it. So you can. That helps when you have islands laid out flat. So hold Shift and click. And then I'm going to zoom in with space and Control. And it's going to go around here and go around here and down here and Enter. Okay. So I've got all the inside and the outside. Control Shift I, delete, Control D to delete that. So the colors are really different. I'm not worrying about that right now. We'll deal with that later. And then let's just make sure this is in the right place. Control Shift S, Tab J for JPEG. I'm not sure why we're here. And let's resave our test. And yes, and yes. Okay, back in Blender, let's reload our test. So let's grab that, click that, and hit Enter. And okay, so we've got, let's go to Object. mode. Okay, so now we've got our object selected here. And let's go to edit mode and click a face and then zoom in. Okay, so now that's all covered. Let's go over here. That's all covered, okay. The sole is all covered. Heel is covered. We actually wanted this area to be that chrome. So let's go back to texture paint. Hit N to grab our tool. Click tool. Let's pick a color like gold. Let's make it gold. Right, gold. Gold. Yes. Expensive. Love it. Okay, so that's gold there. Let's color this gold too, so we just know. Okay, let's go to image and save as, and save over our Photoshop JPEG here. Okay, and let's go back into Photoshop. Okay, back in Photoshop, file open. Let's grab our updated texture here. Control A, Control C, Control W, Control V. Let's put this up here. Okay, so the gold area is right there. So let's hide this. Let's call this reference. And let's go into the correct layer. If you get a bunch of layers here and you don't know where you're at, you can hit V and hit Control and click on a texture, like on the page, and you can see the layer jumps to where you're at. So that's helpful. So Control there, you can see we're on here, and just M is for this marquee tool, L is for the lasso tool. So M, and then grab it, delete it, Control D to unselect. Okay, so this is all good. This was our gold area, so let's just make that gold. So let's make a layer here. Let's call it, oops. If you double click over here, it pulls up this layer style. If you double click exactly on the letters, you can change the name. Okay, gold, M for marquee. Click and drag around this area because we wanted that gold. And we wanted these areas, let's see here. Yep. To be gold also. So let's grab those, Let's make it gold color. Okay. All right. So now those are colored gold. Since we're here, let's color these areas another color. So let's call this, I don't know, smooth leather. And let's go and select those areas. So I'm going to hit the L key and just click around all of this area here. And I don't think we want that outside area. Well, I'll just grab it here for now. Just, oops, M for marquee. So I've selected this area. Actually, let's go in here. I missed this here. Actually, let me show you how I did that. So I missed this here. I don't want to add to this selection. So I have L for lasso selected. I'm going to hold Shift and you get a little plus, and then you can add to your selection. Okay. And then hit M for marquee, hold Shift again. I have a little plus, it's kind of hard to see. And then click and drag, oops, and then we've added to our selection. Okay, so this is the smooth leather that I want. This down here might not work, but we're going to put it there for now. And then I want to fill that with a color. So let's go and color this like light gray. Alt delete. And now that whole area is filled with light gray. Okay, so let's go and see how this looks in Blender. I want to see what this stuff is. So Control Shift S, Tab J. Let's go back to our textures here and save our test. Yes. Okay. Back in Blender again, reload our test, and let's see what we've got here. So we, you can't tell. So this is all the area that we colored light gray, and it looks the same. But this part out here is that part that we weren't sure what it was, this area here. Oh, you can see there's the light gray in this 2D layout. And I think it'll be nice to have this outside trim match this here. This part is going to be almost white, so I think that will match okay. Okay, so that's pretty good. Got all our basics laid out. Let's add some stitching. Okay, so let's add stitching everywhere we have these little dashed lines. Okay, so back in Photoshop, let's go and add our stitching. So we will go to our layers and make a new layer. Call this stitching. Go to our pen tool with the P key, or click this here. Then we're going to go and draw in where we want stitching. The way this pen tool works is if you click and drag, you create a handles that controls the direction and the strength of the curve. So you click and drag once, click and drag a second time, you can see the curve appears. With this tool, the less control points you add, the easier it is to handle. And then let's just click a few times and go through and let's add all the stitching in one chain. So let's click and drag there. So this method of creating stitching is it's probably not as high quality as creating it in Blender, but it's a lot easier. Okay, let's go and continue our stitching like that. Let's see what else we got here. Okay. And was there anything else? There was, and I went over here, so I'll have to fix that later. Okay, let's add these stitchings to this part. And I think that was everything. Yes. So I'm going to hit enter to finish that. Then let's grab this corner point tool and then drag over, and we can move things around. Here we go. So let's click, oops. Hit A for the open arrow tool. I guess that one works better. So move that over here. Let's grab this one, move that over there. This curve is messing things up, so let's go back to that caret tool and then click the handle and drag, and you can abruptly kind of move it like that. Hit A again and move this over, so this way nothing is kind of like overlapping. Okay. So that's all done. Now let's make this look like stitching. So first let's make this smaller. And how big do we want this? I think that's okay. And let's go to our dashes and click that. These are all boxy, so let's go and change that. Oops. And make it round. Okay, that's good. Let's click more options to make that smaller. Let's say this first number here is for that dash here. The second is for the gap, so you can make this 1. It's too tight. 1.5. Maybe this could be 2.5. Just make it so it looks nice. I think that's nice. Okay, that's good. And then let's go and check it out really quick and see how it looks. Let's turn off our guide like that, so that way we can see it a little bit better. Then Control-Shift-S, Tab J for JPEG. Let's go back to our textures and save our test. And let's load up our test. Click enter and okay, so we've got stitching. So some of it needs to be, it's a little loose there. Don't worry about that one, we'll delete that in Photoshop later. That looks more or less okay. You can get this as detailed as you want it. Should probably fix that one. So just go through and see where you like to improve things. I think for me, the only place I'm really concerned about is like down here, maybe there. So let's see if we can find this. Let's go back to Photoshop here. I believe it was the heel. Let's grab our guide. So it's either this side or that side. So let's see here. Oops. A for the open arrow tool. You can click and drag that. Maybe put that there. Maybe tighten this one up a bit. Alright, I think that's maybe this one here too. Okay. Control-Shift-S, Tab J. Go to textures, save that. Yes. Let's switch back into Blender. Again, load our test, and oh, we left the guide on. But we can still see the dashes. That looks better. Yeah, okay, I think that's pretty good. So that's basically most of the work is done for the texture. Now we just need to make this all have the right colors, and we'll create normal maps for it. So let's go back into Photoshop and do that. Okay, so back in Photoshop, let's duplicate our stitching layer and hide that. And then we will compress it. So if you grab the stitching, this is actually a vector. It's made with a vector. So if you need to translate that to pixels. So if you grab that vector layer here with the blank layer, if you click this here, you make a layer. So I'm going to grab those two layers and hit Control E, and then that collapses it. So now this is no longer a vector. This is pixels. So if you hit the M tool and drag and select and hit delete, now you can delete this. Okay, so let's go and delete everything that we don't need. We can do that by going back to this UV map layer, hitting the W for the wand key. This will select everything that's not an island. So click here and you can see everything is selected that's not an island. Go to select, modify, contract, and let's say 5 pixels. So this makes your whole selection smaller by 5 pixels. And you can see everything moved out from the island by a little bit. And now let's make sure we're on our stitching layer and then hit delete. And then that was hard to see. Okay, let's go here. So hit delete, and then everything that we don't need for the stitching gets deleted. I do see that we've still got this. We don't want that. Let's delete that. Okay, let's hide our guide. Oh, we don't need this too. M to select that, delete. We don't need this, select that and delete. Control delete, Control D to unselect. Okay, that's pretty good. So now let's make these all the colors we want. Let's hide this UV map too. So this diamond pattern, so you can do this destructively or non-destructively. If you have this layer selected, Control D to make sure you have nothing selected. So this next command will affect everything on this layer right here. If you hit Control L, it'll adjust the levels for everything on that layer. So you can make this whole thing lighter. Or you can have this layer selected, hit Control left click so you have everything on that layer selected, and then hit this here and go to brightness and contrast or levels, and then you can do the same thing in a non-destructive way. So this way you can lighten the whole thing up. And I think she's going to have white shoes. So let's just make this really, really, really light. I mean, for doing true PBR, it'd be like that. So we're kind of faking it. So let's do something like that. So it's a kind of a fake PBR. Okay, so let's make our smooth leather here. So let's click the V tool, Control, click on the smooth leather. So this one, since it's all one color, you don't really damage you don't lose any data by doing a levels command on there, versus here, if you did levels, you would lose data. I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to just highlight this layer, hit Control L, and I'll make this whole thing lighter. So it's almost, so just make it visually match the toe. Okay, we got that. This whole inside leather, I don't want that, it's way too dark. So I'm going to Control click that, I'm going to go to hue saturation and take all that brown out of there, because I want that to be very faint. I'm not going to mess with the lightness. Then I'm going to Control click that leather layer again and go to contrast, brightness, actually I'll go to levels. And then I'm going to lighten this whole thing up. Like that, maybe. Let's explain the levels here a bit in Photoshop. So if you drag these, this basically increases the contrast for your layer. If you drag these, this makes everything kind of flat. So you can see it's almost one color. So there's different ways to adjust things. For this, I'm going to get a little bit of contrast in the texture by dragging that down, then dragging this up so it's really light. So that's going to be the color. Okay, let's do the gold next. V, and then hit Control left click to select the gold. And then for this, I don't know how to color that. Let's just make it a pale gold. So I'm going to grab that layer here. This is all one color, so there's no fear of losing data or information by applying a levels command to this layer. So I'm going to highlight that, Control D to make sure nothing is selected, hit Control L, and I'm just going to lighten that up a bit. Oh, nope. Control U for hue saturation. I'm going to desaturate it and lighten it a bit. I think that's good. We're going to make this metallic so it kind of reacts differently. Okay, so then let's mess with our stitching. So let's see here, stitching layer. Oops, stitching. So let's duplicate this. So oops, I dragged it to the garbage can by accident. So if you drag it to this page icon, you duplicate it. So let's hide our original. And so for our stitching layer, let's hit Control U for hue saturation. Let's just lighten the whole thing up. Let's make it white. It's a little too white. Let's make it very, 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 very light gray. Okay, so I think that's pretty nice. I think our leather area here is too brown. So let's hit V, Control click, find our hue saturation down here. Let's take out some color. Okay, so you have barely any color. And then Control Shift S, Tab J for JPEG. Let's go back to our test here. Save that. Let's go back to Blender and reload our test. Okay, so that looks pretty nice. Oh, we gotta make this whole area darker. Shoot. Let's go and do that really quick. Back into Photoshop. Let's turn on our guide. Okay, which one was the bottom? This one here. So let's hit L to select. Let's just grab all of the bottom area. This is the bottom leather area. And let's go and we want to apply this next command on just this layer here. So I want to have this layer highlighted, so it'll apply this filter right over here. If you did it up here, it'd mess with other things, like all these other layers. So make sure you have the layer you want to affect only. Then let's go to, I guess, brightness and contrast. And let's just make it darker. Oops, darker. It didn't do too much. Maybe we can pull this up here. Okay, that's better. It's nice doing things this way because you can always adjust things later, which we will do when we create our normal map for this shoe. Okay, so I think that's pretty good. Let's turn off our guide. Maybe a little too dark. So I think that's pretty good. Control Shift S, Tab J. Let's go back to our test, save that. Let's go back into Blender and let's reload our test. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. So now let's make a normal map for our stitching and for this little diamond pattern and for some of this leather texture stuff. Okay, back in Photoshop, let's actually make our metal map and our roughness map first before the normals. So let's go over here, hit V, and then Control left click to find our layer. So here's our gold layer, these things here. We'll make those metal. Let's drag that layer down to this paper icon, and then move it up here. So this is our duplicated gold layer. Let's make a blank layer by clicking that and put it just below the gold layer. Then let's color the whole thing black. So you can do that by these two colors here. This is the foreground color and background color. So you can change that to white and black by hitting D. And then if you go to your layer here and hit Alt Delete, it fills the whole thing with this foreground color. So that's all black there. And for the gold, this is probably okay the way it is. So let's save it, Control Shift S, and we'll save this as a TIFF file, and I think it's going to be good. So let's turn off the layers, reduce the file size, and we'll call this Mary Jane Metal, and click Save. Okay, so that should be fine. So let's go and hide those. We can put those inside a layer folder. So so you have them if you need them. Let's hide that. Okay. So whatever is light will be matte. Whatever is dark will be glossy. So let's pull our guide up here and see what to make glossy. So we want the heel area, the toe area. We wanted the metal areas should be glossy also. This outside trim should be glossy, and I'm trying to remember what we did with these things here. So this part's matte, this part's glossy. So I think it's whatever is the smooth white. So we'll hit V, hit Control left click, then we'll, if you hit Control and left click on the layer here, you'll select whatever that layer is. Okay, so now we've got that all selected. It's hard to see here. Let's go up here, make a new layer. We'll call this smooth, and we'll Alt click Make it all black. Let's put this below the guide. Okay, so we've got our heel, our toe, this part here. This was not. Yeah, okay, so I think this is the part that we want to be glossy. So we want that, and then we also want the metal parts to be glossy, so let's grab that also. So if you control left click on a layer, you grab whatever's in that layer. If you control shift and left click on a layer, you'll add to the selection. So now we have all of the black area and all of the yellow area. Then we will control, we will alt delete. So now we have them both selected. And so that's all going to be super glossy. Okay, that's good. Now we want the stitching not to be glossy. So let's go and find our stitching, which is right here. And let's duplicate that down here and drag this above the smooth layer we just made. Let's Control D to unselect. Okay, so now we have the stitching over here, and this part will be matte because it's white. So I think that's good. This the checker texture, or the diamond texture, should be, I think, maybe a little bit glossy. So let's Control click that. That's here. So we can probably do this. Let's hide that. We'll Control click the diamond layer down here. So we have that selected, and we'll make a new adjustment layer. So we'll click this and do levels. And so let's make that pretty light, but not super light. So if it's a little bit darker, that'll be a little bit glossy. So something like that. Maybe like that. It'll be kind of like half glossy. Maybe a little bit lighter. Yeah. And then let's check our guide again here. So the inside of the shoe and the sole. Okay, let's turn off our guide. So the sole, I think we can go pretty dark. Let's go V, Control click, grab that. Let's just grab that selection here and go up to where our smooth layer was, make a new layer, and we will go Alt Delete and fill it with black. That'll make it shiny. And then let's hit Control L to go to our levels tool and just make this pretty light. I think the bottom of the shoe is pretty non-shiny. Okay, back to our guide. We've got this inside area. I think that should be just a little bit glossy, so let's just go and grab that. Enter to select it. Then make a new layer. Again, let's fill it with black. Let's hide the guide. So maybe about as glossy as these diamond areas. So Control L for levels, and let's just bring that up like that. And let's make sure I'm not missing something here. Yeah, stitching, diamond patterns. Do we get that outside area? Yeah, that was glossy. I bet you this whole smooth area is probably too glossy, so let's Control D to unselect. Control L. Let's lighten this just a bit. Okay. So now let's save this. Control Shift S. And I'm guessing it's okay, so let's do an actual save in the JPEG. We'll call this Mary Jane Smooth. Okay, let's go to Blender and check them out. Okay, back in Blender, let's expand our material window here. So let's add our smooth. So Shift A, S, I, M, A for image texture. Put that there. That's weird. Click Open. Let's navigate to where our texture is. And so let's look for the smooth. Make this non-color. and drag that to the smooth, the roughness. And let's go to the preview here. Hard to see. Let's change the environment to something where we can see it better. Okay, so we can kind of see the toe is shiny, the stitching is not, this diamond pattern is not shiny, the sole area or the inside area is not shiny, sole's not shiny. Okay, so I think we've got this correctly done. Then let's add a metalness map here. So let's grab this, Shift D, X that out, click open, and let's navigate to our textures and open our metal map. Then let's plug that into the metallic. Oh, let's make this non-color and plug this into metallic. So that should make it metallic. Okay, so now our little latch detail on our heel is metal looking. Okay, so now let's go back and do our normal map. Okay, so back in Photoshop, let's put all of these layers we used for our roughness and metalness, our roughness, into a layer here, or a folder. Okay, let's put this down here. Let's grab these guys. I think it was those. Put that in here. And then hide that. Okay, and save it. Okay, so for our normal map, anything that's light comes forward, and anything that's dark fades back. So you want to make this so that it reflects that. So basically, whatever we want to come forward, make it lighter. I usually save this as a separate file because it messes everything up. So let's go to File and Save As. We'll call this, I actually just tested it, so I already have it saved, so I'll save it again here. So save over, and okay. Start with this checker pattern. So let's make whatever, let's see here. Black will set back, and then the white will come forward. So let's see here. Let's adjust this. So the more contrasty you make it, the more extreme it'll be. This part is more of a texture, so I don't want to mess with it too much. But I want this whole background to be darker than the stitching. So let's bring that back a bit here. So I think that's going to be pretty good. Let's do the sole here, the bottom. So I think that can be pretty flat. So let's lower the contrast on that. Make sure it's the right one. Yeah, lower the contrast. Maybe have that rather medium. For this leather on the inside of the shoe, let's see here. I think we want these middle parts to come up. So whatever you want to come away from the surface, make it light. So we should probably do this. We'll grab all of that leather texture and apply an inverse or invert. Okay, there we go. So now for the sole, anything that's light will come up, whatever's dark goes back. Same thing for the other part of the heel, but let's actually hide that. Okay, that's probably better. So this part, I don't want it to be too much texture. I think it's probably okay. Then let's go and mess with this bottom part again and make that lower contrast. So that's not working so good. Let's do a different one. Let's do levels. Levels. And then let's do that. Okay, that's what I want. So it's just much less punchy. So this will make it pretty smooth. Okay, so that's pretty good. These are smooth, that's fine. For the smooth area here, this one, let's control left click that and add a levels to it. So let's just knock it back a bit so that way the stitching can come off of it. So put that like there. And then let's go to our stitching. And let's add some form to it. So again, remember, whatever is dark will set back, whatever is white will come forward. So I'm duplicating the stitching so we have two stitching layers. So for the back one, let's Control D, Control L. I'm going to make that a little bit darker. And then for the front one, it's going to be lighter, but we will Control left click that, select Modify Feather, and 1. So this is going to make a fuzzy selection around this edge. And then let's hit Control Shift I. So now it's selecting everything outside up to this mark, but it's a little bit fuzzy. So when you delete it, the middle part will stay white and the edges will go transparent. So now what you can see is it's a little bit brighter in the middle than it is on the side. You can't see much, but it's actually doing something. If you turned it off, it's kind of like that. You can, let's exaggerate that. Let's delete it again here. Okay, maybe you can see it a bit more now. Let's Control D, let's Control L and see if it's full white. It wasn't. So you can see a bit more contrast. And we can actually go back to this lower layer, Control L and make it a bit darker. So now you can see there's a little more form. You want to be careful though, because for this back part of the stitching, if the contrast is too close between the smooth part of the shoe and this, you won't see much of a difference. So let's go back to our smooth part of the shoe by hitting V and Control left click. So now we've got that. Let's make this whole thing darker, so the stitching really pops out. Okay, so I think that's it. Okay, so now let's make the normal map. So let's just save this. Okay, Control S, then let's grab everything that's active. Doesn't matter if these are not active. And just drag it to this new here. Control E to just merge it all. So now it's all just compressed. Then let's go to Filter, 3D, and Normal Map. And GIMP also has the same functions, so you can do this and that if you want to, and not pay for Photoshop. Okay, so you can kind of preview it, and it looks about right. So let's click OK. You can only tell so much. Sometimes these things look inverted, so you can try and flip it. This view always confuses me, so I just kind of export it and see, and if it's not good, I'll flip it in Photoshop or Blender. So click OK, then Control Shift S. We'll save this as a TIFF with no layers, and we'll call this Mary Jane Normal. Save, yes, replace, and OK. Now let's go and see how it looks in Blender. Okay, so let's add our normal maps. Let's get this out of the way. Shift A, S, I, M, A for image texture. Click open. Let's go and find our newly made normal map. Mary Jane normal, open that. And set this to non-color. So drag color to normal. Then Shift A, S, N, O, R for normal map. Click that on that line, and that applies the normal map. So now we can take a look and see how it looks. Okay, so now the stitching is popping out. Yep, popping out there. It's hard to see if this has a texture. We can take off the roughness and lower it. So now we can see it catches the highlight, and okay, that's got a texture. That's good. Let's see if this base here has a texture, and yep, it's got a texture. So okay, so we've got our normal map is doing something. So let's reconnect our roughness here. So that is half of the normal map. So now we're going to make a high resolution version of this shoe, and then we'll bake that high resolution version with this normal map onto a low resolution version of the shoe, which is what we have right in front of us. And then we'll have all of these little textures, the normal map textures, plus a nicely shaped shoe baked onto a low poly shoe. Okay, I hope that made sense. So let's go and do that. Okay, let's go to the modeling workspace and turn off X-ray and go into object mode. And then let's create a new collection just to make it easier for us to navigate, and we'll call it bake. Let's grab our shoe, hit M, oops, grab our shoe, go over here and hit M, go to bake. And let's toggle everything off that we're not using. This way it's just easier for us to stay organized. Grab this shoe, let's call this fancy flat half round. So this is what we'll be using in the end. This will be our low poly version. I've noticed that when Blender bakes organic shapes, it does a better job when there's no edge creases or sharp in it, in the mesh, versus hard surface edges or flat edges. It seems to work okay with creases. So we're going to modify this shoe so that way we take out all the creases except for some of the hard areas. So let's do that first. We'll hit A to select all, go to edge mode here, and then edge and clear sharp, and then go to Shift E and -1. Shift E is, I'm not sure what it is. Shift E is edge crease. So edge crease and type -1, then the whole thing should get all doughy. So you can see everything is very smooth now. But let's go in and add some creases. So we have all these red lines, which are seams. Let's turn that off so we don't confuse ourselves. Let's turn off our seams. Okay, so now you can see, we'll be able to tell which parts are sharp. So let's Alt, grab that, grab that, grab that, and grab that. Then we'll do Shift E +1. Then edge and mark sharp. Then let's grab these two and Shift E, and let's just drag our cursor until it's almost all the way sharp. I think that's okay. Then let's go to face mode and hit L and L. And then go back to edge mode and Shift E +1. This part's pretty straight, so we're just going to make that sharp. And then edge and mark sharp. Okay, so that's all good. I've also noticed that when you have open surfaces like this strap here. You can see it's a open surface on the inside, and it's up against the front of this part here. That kind of causes problems when baking. It'll just project this whole thing onto the surface here, and it's so close that you can't adjust it to work. At least I haven't. So I'm going to move some things around, but I don't want to mess up this mesh. So what we're going to do is use shape keys. Go here, click basis, and then click key 1, drag this to 1, and now we can modify this mesh. So let's grab this L, just move it aside, grab this L and G, move it aside, because these are open also. And then let's go ahead and grab this here, and it's Alt click, then Shift, 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 Shift. Let's set, and so this one, it's obviously it's attached, so we can't just move it. So we're going to just bend it. So let's drop a 3D cursor with Shift right click. We will navigate around the 3D cursor with this here, and then hit R and just rotate that out. Grab this here, go select MM, then right shift R again, drop that again, select MM, R, and that's probably good. So like from the side view here, oops, from the side view, it's not overlapping, and so this way the rays are, it's pretty far away, so it's not going to be a problem. Okay, so that's pretty good. Oh, also these surfaces here, same thing, they're open and colliding through. You can't see it, but it's just barely overlapping here, so let's move those. Unfortunately, these are attached, so if you go L and L and grab those, if you hit G, it's stuck. So you can go to, it's actually partially stuck. So you can go to Mesh and Split and Selection. Then hit G and just move that over here. And then same thing, L, L, L. This is all together. And then Mesh, Split Selection, and hit G, move that over here. Okay, so we're going to bake it like this. And when we're all done, we'll just turn it off and it goes back. So it's kind of an easy way to deal with these open surfaces poking through or being close to other surfaces. Let's go to object mode and let's grab this and Shift D to duplicate, and we'll call this fancy flat high detail. Okay, let's hide the other one, and let's go and add some detail to this shoe here. So you can see everything is kind of one big blob now. You can see it easier over here. It's just all smooth because we took off all of our nice sharps. So let's go and add back in those sharp details. But now we can control which parts we want softer and which parts we want smoother. So this crease here is the outer edge of the leather, and so I want that to be smoother. So I'll use the fillet command. So Control B. Now when you do the fillet, make sure you're not blowing through your geometry. If you have the sub D turned on, it's harder to see. So make sure you turn it off before you do it. Then drag that a bit. If you scroll the mouse, you'll see you can add more cuts. We don't need that much. It's a shoe, so no one really cares about the shoe. You don't usually see it, so you don't need that much detail. Even though we're going to throw this all away after we bake it. But the more cuts you add, the harder it is to do the rest of our bevels. So let's not go crazy with this. If possible, it works better to have the bevel run through the whole thing and not stop. And then here you can see it's going to be harder because we're so close. So let's Control B and just move that a bit like that. if you turn it on, you can see it gave us some nice definition there. We also want to put bevels on these guys here. This part you want to be sharp, so put a very small bevel. Same thing over here. And then let's zoom in really close because this part here is going to be a problem. So Control B and move it just a little bit. And maybe add one more cut to make it look very sharp. The more you add, the sharper it'll look in this small area. And then turn that on. And it's hard to see because it's shiny. Okay, so that looks pretty sharp. Okay. For these guys here, let's blow away all these sharp edges. So for our high poly, you don't need the sharp edges. So hit A, Shift E, -1, and then edge, clear, sharp. Okay, then let's go and grab all of these things. So these will want, let's go to X-ray and grab all the edges, and then let's turn this off. So Control B and just make sure we don't go too far. Okay, that's good. These parts are flattened, so we can leave the fillet very small so it's nice and sharp. Okay, let's see what else we got here. So this heel, turn that back on. So obviously this is a problem. And turn off X-ray. So let's go and grab these loops here and let's make them smooth. Sharp with a Control B and just a bit. And then we want to bring the sharpness back into the front area. So let's go and do that. And this is terminating here. It might not be nice. Let's see what happens. Control B. Might be okay. It kind of works better when the loop runs all the way through an object. So let's Control B and drag it up a bit. I think that's a little bit cleaner. Okay. Okay, so that platform there, the little tiny heel is nice and sharp. Let's go and add some roundness here. This one should be less sharp. So Control B, let's try and make this bigger. Let's do less cuts, maybe like that. And let's add one here, and let's make this smaller so it's sharper, and maybe add more cuts. That looks pretty good. Then let's add one here and make this one soft too. Control B. Let's see this platform here. I think that looks okay. So let's leave that. Okay, so that's our high detail version. Let's make sure we have no edge cuts. Yep, X-ray mode and no pink edges. That's good. Let's go back to our UV editing workspace and let's turn on our low detail and our high detail. And then we will bake this. So right now this is the normal we made in Photoshop. So that's without all these fillets on there. So let's make a new material, a new texture. Shift A, S-I-M-A for image texture. Put that there. And then let's click New and Mary Jane. Normal high. Okay, let's call that normal high. And we'll make this 4096. 4096. So I noticed that when you bake normals, it's not very smooth. So I like to bake it twice the size and then I res it down in Photoshop. So that way it kind of makes it kind of like it's like a poor man's anti-aliasing. So that's why this is very big. So we'll click OK. Make this non-color. And then let's display it here. Mary Jane normal high. So this way we can see it as we bake. Maybe let's save this. Mary Jane High, textures. Okay. So I've done a few tutorials on baking, but let's just go over this again so we know how this, in case you're just doing this shoe thing here, this shoe tutorial. So the way baking works is you have a high poly mesh that we made already. You have a low poly mesh, and then you have a texture here in your material, and then you display it here. And so when you bake, you want to physically use your mouse to grab your material so it's highlighted. Then you want to grab your high detail mesh. I find it easier to click it here. And then shift click your low detail mesh. So make sure your low detail is yellow in the outliner. And then go to your render setup and make sure it's on cycles. That's the engine that we use to bake. And then scroll down to bake, right down there. Make sure this is set to normal. So when you bake, you want to play with the extrusion and the ray distance settings. And so that's a real pain, and I usually have to try it a few times until I get it right. So let's go and do that. So I tested already, so I know what settings to use for this shoe, but let's do it once where it looks bad, and we'll do it once where it looks good, so you know what bad looks like. So let's set this to 0 and 0, and let's click bake and see what happens. Okay, so you can see all these yellows and oranges. So that's a bad bake. And I can explain how that happened. So let's figure out how to fix this. When you're baking, you want, so the orange here is the high poly mesh and the yellow is the low poly mesh. You want the yellow mesh to be just a little bit bigger than the high poly mesh. And you can do that by using extrusion. So if you make this bigger, so now the low poly mesh is 0.05 meters bigger than the high poly. And this way, when you're baking, all the rays will shoot evenly from the high poly to the low poly. It shoots outwards towards the low poly mesh. The ray distance controls how far the rays will go. Usually I leave that at 0, so it's infinity. And so let's click bake and see what happens. But when you're doing your baking, you'll probably have to play with this setting a few times to get it to be the perfect setting. If you go too little, you'll get lots of yellows. If you go too much, you'll get weird little deformations will pop up in your normal map. Okay, so let's check this out here. Okay, that looks a lot better. This is a bit weird there. But overall, this is actually pretty good. Okay, so let's test this and see how it looks. Let's turn off our high detail mesh, turn on our low detail mesh, and then let's go to our shape key and turn that off. And then this here is our high detail. And so let's drag this color to the color there. And now it is applied. Let's actually toggle it so we can see the difference. So this is the normal without the shape information, and this is the normal with the shape information. And you can see it just gets a lot more defined, even though the mesh itself is pretty doughy. Then we can go back in and add some, we can actually delete this and delete that. So we can actually go back in and add some, let's hide our seams. We can add some sharps, Shift E +1, so we can further enhance the crispiness exactly where we want it. So this, Shift E +1, I want that to be more defined. These are good, they're all soft. This one here, let's make that sharper. Then this metal stuff, we want that sharp. Oh, it's already sharp. And that's sharp. yeah, so I think that's our normal map. It's all baked. And we still have the normal maps from our Photoshop work too. So all the stitching that bumps out. So I think we're good to go. All right, so we've got a shoe. We can also grab our shoe, zoom to it. You'll need to mirror this. So make sure your origin is right at the 0 point. Then go to mirror. You can mirror the leg too. Wait, I don't see my origin. Let's move our origin to the 0 point. So Shift S and 1 to move our 3D cursor to the 0 point. Grab our leg, object, set origin, origin 3D cursor. And then now let's mirror it. All right, so she's got shoes. That's it for our shoe tutorial. I hope your character now has a fabulous pair of shoes. If this was helpful, let me know by leaving a comment, or liking, or subscribing, or better yet, supporting me on Patreon. If you've been following along with the entire complete character tutorial series, this is the end of all the modeling. And in the next video, we will cover rigging. Thanks.